convention? It's hard to process.
Yes. Well, actually, we're doing pretty well. As of this morning, we have 75 people registered. So that's good. We were kind of sweating it there, but we got a huge pickup after the last email blast in October. We got 12 registrations right after that last email blast, trying to get on that early bird registration. So that was very helpful. We know COVID's a concern. We know people are still kind of hesitant until they see what's going to happen, but we're hoping that by the first of the year, it's going to pick up. We, from what I understand, are going to have a record number of layout tours. I believe Dave reported at our meeting we had in October that we have possibly 23 different layout tours.
Nice.
Which is, yes, very nice. And we've got a couple garden layouts that will probably be added to that. So that'll be nice. We've got 16 confirmed clinics and another 8 pending. We just sent out another request to past presenters, and there'll be an article in the next branch line. So we're hoping for some more people to step forward. But I would like to thank all of you that have already committed to doing at least one clinic. And I appreciate that just about everybody that signed up also said that they would do a repeat. So we like to do that so that if people, have a conflict, they really want to go to your clinic, but somebody else's clinic is also attractive to them. It may give them an opportunity to attend yours at another time. We're at about 40% of our room block, the minimum we have to have for our room block at the hotel before we have to start paying for meeting space. That's encouraging. We're hoping that will also pick up after the first of the year. Let's see what else. Merchandise sales are doing really well. We added the baseball cap and the mug, and those seem to be very popular. Again, because they're not terribly expensive and everybody's probably got too many shirts already. So yeah.
Never have them.
I know. And also on the convention car, we've already sold 33 of the cars, and AccuRail has offered to put a link on their site to sell the cars at some point, put a link to us so that people can buy the cars from us. So that'll help get rid of any excess inventory that we have. And what else? Oh, swap meet. We've already sold 19 tables for the swap meet, so it's going to be a good one. We only have 30 tables available. So if you are interested in selling at the swap meet on Friday night, go back. If you've already registered, go back in and sign up for a table. And if you haven't registered, why not? And go in and get your table. And let's see what else. We've got 7 vendor tables sold. 4 of those are for daylight sales. They're going to be bringing all their t-shirts and everything. So that'll be nice. So we're hoping to get some more vendors. We're trying to work on that one, and we're working on a speaker. And other than that, we're just plugging along and trying to get things done.
Great, guys. I think it's fair to say there's no way to properly thank you for what you're doing. The amount of the work and sort of thankless effort. Except for me, we're all excited about the convention, except for me. So thank you. Any questions from the group for Denny or Cliff? Good. And while we're taking a step back from things, Frank Markovich, we have you on board. Is there any agenda that you have today? Because you're welcome as a guest. I just wasn't sure if you have something in mind to say to anybody. Frank?
No, I wanted to attend the meeting. I do have to leave at about 11:45 as I paid for a class. My wife and I are actually taking classes.
Look at that. Well, no, we're thrilled to have you. Thank you. And we'll keep moving right along. So other business, Giuseppe, you're up. You want to give us a quick director's report?
Yeah. Well, with Frank in the presence of the group, I have to be very careful now.
For a change.
Yeah. Well, the BOD is working on the question that was posed about amalgamating the positions of director and superintendent for 2 reasons. One was a lack of volunteers for both positions. And the second one is insurance coverage. where a superintendent seems not to be insured by the NMRA. The director position is. I'll bring it up to the next BOD, and Frank can hear it now, but I was reviewing a letter sent in 2009 to all PCL region presidents by Hemsler, the Esquire for the NMRA, where with the way I read it, it seems like all officials, even at the divisional level, are covered by this NMRA insurance as long as everybody's an NMRA member. So we're working on that, and I will let you know in the future what transpires.
Giuseppe, as an update,
Yes.
Chris Palermo looked at that, and other than the director, he said they're not covered. I will see if I can get a final ruling from the NMRA.
Yeah, that would be good. Okay,
Okay.
that's my report.
Fair enough. Thank you so much. Just quickly in the rest of our division business, Dave Grunman, Paymaster, Chief Clerk, quick report.
Quick report. We have a current balance of $5,205.80. And that includes a check of $113.30 to our convention people, because they hired an artist to do our logo. And that's the end of the report.
Don't forget, Dave, I asked you to make a financial provision for the bribery fund that I had to use to get all these people to speak today, except Michael. and Tim.
Yeah, I know, but they'll
Yeah.
zero out the account then.
No, I realize, but that reflects the quality of who we have speaking, so it's okay. So we'll be
Okay.
broke, but we'll be happy.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dave. Gus, quick membership report. Good to see you, Gus.
Hi, we have 112 current members. The NMRA list of 2 people out of our division, so I eliminated them from our list. One from Nevada and one from New Jersey, or someplace. Massachusetts, I'm sorry. And we had only one person who was 30 days late, nobody who was 60 days late. And we have no new members to show for the month of October.
Oh, look at us hanging in there. That's great. Thank you for that, Gus. The rest of the divisional staff, anything to say? Scott Lockhart, I think you're here. Call for submissions for the call board or anything like that?
Yeah, I'm looking for show and tell. I'm going to be using the show and tell from the meeting for the call board, but if anybody else has anything, I would appreciate you submitting it. And we have talked about doing ads for model railroad stores or outlets or online stores in the call board, and I'll be sending out an email probably next week with more information about that.
Excellent. Thank you, Scott. Thank you for your work on the call board. It's terrific. And usually what you've been doing is a call board comes out sometime after the meet. So as you said, you could pick up all this content. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
No, not necessary, but I don't know if Al or Bill Kaufman have something to say about the work they're doing, or just continue forward, no obligation to speak. I'll consider that done. So let's move to the fun part. I want to thank all the people that were bribed or strong-armed or actually volunteered to speak today. As a reminder, I know you saw the message flash on your screen. The call is being recorded, so you might want to be that much more thoughtful than usual, but the primary consumers for the recording is, of course, other members from the division, and for that matter, for the region in general, because I've encouraged some of the other divisions to take a look at what we're doing, and they're very interested in joining. So we're happy about that. So recorded and archived, I already mentioned that. Please also maintain the wisdom, if you will, the presence of mind to mute if you're not the speaker, unless you have a question or something. The goal here is to muscle through these presentations and keep them light and breezy. And I want to recognize the fact that several of our speakers, as I said at the outset, are not even from our division, but have volunteered to spend time enhancing our content today, which I'm overjoyed about. So today's speakers, I think everybody is here, just so they know where they appear in order. It's roughly the order in which I heard that you wanted to speak. So in other words, it's sort of first come, get in line. So those speakers today, if they're all here, Clifton Linton from Alameda has joined us. He'll go up. followed by Michael Latant, who gave a Oscar-winning presentation last time about Willimantic and is going to pivot a little bit, some of the other things he's doing. Ray Lorber has a layout here and is going to talk about it. Tom Swearingen, some of you know Tom, he's okay, he's okay. He's going to speak. Bill Kaufman's going to speak about an old layout. Adam Palmer is going to speak. And I understand there's additional things from Joe Devaney, John Huckabee, and Dave Grunman himself. So you know where you stand in the program. Most of the presentations are approximately 5 minutes. Some are going to go a little bit longer. But again, we're looking for a box of chocolates here, and we'll just keep going until you find something that you really enjoy. So with that all said, if that doesn't prompt any questions or concerns, let's start off with Cliff Linton. All right, Cliff, you got the floor.
Hi, everybody. Thanks very much for inviting me. Thanks for inviting me, Paul. And I will invoice you for my bribe.
As everybody else is, that's fine.
As everybody else will do that. Okay, if just a quick question. Do I have permission to share my screen?
You have permission and encouragement.
Okay, great. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of a layout that I am developing in Alameda, California. And thanks for tuning in and hearing a little bit about what I want to do on my layout. And as the title slide of this presentation indicates, I'm modeling the switching district in Chicago. It's predominantly going to be, the dominant railroad will be the Baltimore and Ohio Chicago Terminal. But the other railroad logos that you're seeing on the screen are also going to be featured. That includes the Belt Railway Company of Chicago, the Pennsylvania Railroad, and the other one there is the Manufacturers Junction. And notice this says new and improved. New and improved is because the first iteration of this layout was fun to build. It was interesting to do, and ultimately, I found out that it did not fulfill the operational goals that I had for building a layout. And so I did the unthinkable, which is I told everybody who had helped build that thing, thank you very much. And then I tore it all out and tore it all down. And I've had a number of sessions about kind of going over a track plan, and these are my ambitions. And I've received a lot of skepticism and pushback, but here's where we're going anyway. So let's give this a shot. So I'm originally from Chicago. So I want to model Chicago. And I just want to give you a little bit of a sense of what Chicago is all about, because I've discovered out here in the Bay Area that while this kind of flows in my veins, not everybody is really familiar with it. So yeah, 25 railroads come to town to play in this sandbox. And for the most part, they all learned how to play nicely. And that's what I'm aiming for in this layout. So, you know, I played on Paul's inner city Boston layout where switching was considered a contact sport. We play a little bit nicer in Chicago. 57 yards, 37,500 cars traveled per day in the city, and 125 interlocking plants. And let me tell you, I mean, there's no way I'm going to be able to recreate this on this kind of magnitude, but I'll show you what I'm doing. And the interlocking plants are what we're going to be talking about, because that's very important for the layout under development. So this is a map of the B&O CT, and it's one of the innermost belt lines in the city. And it pretty much connects with everybody. And I won't bother to go into the history because it's long and involved and very fascinating. But the next little part, so hopefully you can all see a green highlighted area with a little yellow box around it. That is a portion of the main line that I'm looking to recreate on my layout. And so let's go to the next slide here. So just to give a quick view, that includes an inner city yard called Roby Yard, which you can see sort of in the upper right part. And then it goes all the way down to an area called Forest Hill. which actually is another yard, but I don't have that yard included. And this is a closer look at that highlighted map and also a track map that I have. So what we're looking to model is the Western Avenue Rail Corridor, which was a very heavily trafficked area. So that includes the BNOCT, or the Baltimore, Ohio, Chicago terminal between Roby Yard and 75th Street Tower. And we're also including the Pennsylvania Railroad between 59th Street Yard to Ryerson, which was a huge intercity steel distributing customer. And it's just incredibly iconic. And I guess if you can see the cursor working from the bottom of the screen, this is the layout starts down here at 75th Street Tower, where you have a series of 4 railroads all coming together at this interlocking junction. The BNOCT in blue, it's actually at this time the Penn Central in green, and crossing it are the Belt Railway of Chicago and the Wabash. It was a very, very busy place. Moving our way up, you'll see the BNOCT and the Pennsylvania Cross at 49th Street. And then we go up here to Ash Street, which is where the 2 railroads crossed, the Illinois Central and the Santa Fe. We've got Roby Yard here on the BNOCT and Ryerson Steel. And then we've got another tower up here at Western Avenue. So that's the concept. Hold on a second here. Let me just see 1 second. I hope that I haven't advanced too many screens. Okay, here we go. So as the era that I'm focusing on is the late 1960s and the early 1970s. It's going to be Chicago terminal operations, which will include some passenger trains, transfer runs, locals, over the road freight trains. And what's interesting to me about this is to discover that this actually, surprisingly enough, is a prototype well suited for the model environment. And this photo, which is taken by a former BNOCT dispatcher, Tom White, kind of illustrates my point. So it may not be evident by looking at this, but there's note a single Jeep at the head end, and way in the back there is a caboose. This is a train approaching the 75th Street interlocking, and there's maybe a dozen cars there. But this is the beginning. This is an over the road long distance freight that has been dispatched out of Roby Yard, and it's heading towards Bar Yard, where it will pick up a couple more locomotive units, more cars, and head on out to some exotic place like Newark, New Jersey, or Baltimore, Maryland, or someplace like that. But when I saw this, I said, wow, that is what I'm doing. My average train length is going to be about a dozen cars. This is for me. Track speed is generally 30, 35 miles an hour. So that means that a train would kind of get over the layout pretty quickly, but that's where those interlocking towers come into their necessity, because they're going to be a good speed bump to slow things down for me. And here we have some of the towers. We've got Western Avenue. You saw all of those on an earlier slide, but the Western Avenue and 49th Street towers are going to be full. All legs are going to be operational. So fully operational interlocking towers. Ash Street and 75th Street towers are going to have a lot of crossing traffic that'll be simulated. Let's see. And basically what's going to happen is this crossing traffic is going to start to slow the progress of a train over the layout, because it's likely that if you're taking a transfer run across the layout, that you're going to get hung up at Ash Street Tower because the super chief is going outbound from Dearborn Street Station on its way to LA. Or if you come to 75th Street Tower, there's a Wabash inbound freight coming along. So my goal is to eventually have the towers be manned outside of the layout room, so that because I kind of have a smaller space, which we'll get into in a second, but the tower operator would be able to view basically sort of a web page type of design. They'd be able to see with cameras that will strategically locate it near or in the towers. And they'll have train sheets, so they'll know what's coming and going. And that'll keep some of the traffic out of the layout room. Then the other part of the layout is the Cicero Avenue rail corridor. And we're just giving that basically a half a cup of coffee to join in on this little party. But this provides our connection to the Manufacturers Junction Railway. And it also gives us a chance to bring in the Belt Railway of Chicago in their 16th Street yard. And just to give you a sense, this is not to the spike and tie plate type of recreation of Chicago, because when you look at the actual track plan, it doesn't look like it would fit, because it's like you held it up in a mirror and then read it backwards. But most of the elements are there, just not in the order that you would have hoped. But we all make compromises, and that's one of the ones that I have to make. So the MJ, just to real quick, is that was an exclusive, and that shows you the area that I'm looking to model there. I'll come back to the MJ. A couple of yards and track arrangements that we're including is the Roby Street yard, which is a kind of a back pocket shoebox type of yard in the most inner city of Chicago. So it's not a very big yard. So the trains that went in and out of there tended to be on the smaller side. And 16th Street on the Belt Railway of Chicago, which was not a major classification yard, but in my fantasy world, I'm elevating it. And then we're including, which you saw previously, the third main on the BNOCT running between 49th Street and 75th Street towers. And that's kind of an interesting piece of overflow track, and played a role in special scheduling of a train that would run uninterrupted between once it went through some of the highly congested areas of Chicago. And it was kind of done as a favor between the BNOCT and the Chicago Northwestern. And it's a fascinating little vignette that I want to recreate on my layout. And some of the signature industries that I want to include, I'm not going to be doing too many 1 and 2 car industries. Chicago is a very big industrial center, and they had some very big industries. And you see 2 of the ones that are going to be located on the railroad. On the left is the Western Electric Hawthorne Works in Cicero, Illinois, on the MJ Railway. And this was quite a notable plant. They made a lot of different type of appliances and telephone switching equipment. And then the one on the right is the Ryerson Steel Plant, which the Pennsylvania Railroad served, even though the BNOCT tracks ran right next to it, but they did not have the service contract there. So executing on this whole concept, as you can see on the lower left, a couple of pictures of the very first staging yard that has been constructed and is almost completed, done with all of the testing. I'm using Pico Track and servos to throw the switches. This is going to be an N scale layout in a 20 by 20 foot L-shaped area in my garage. It's going to have 2 operating levels, additional staging levels. This one is actually going to be moved down about 12.5 inches. It's all going to be connected by helixes. This is just a compromise that I have grown comfortable with, and I just have to deal with it. I intend to establish an NCE DCC system to provide control of the locomotives and the trains. It'll have fast track switches. This is the only point where I'm going to be installing prefab Pico switches. I have decided that I am going, every other track switch will be a fast track switches, and it will be a signaled layout because Chicago is signaled, and everything that you saw in the track maps was all Rule 251, 261 territory. So that's how the train authority will be granted.
And hey, Cliff, 2 more minutes.
And well, that's
Perfect.
good because
Even
note
better.
that
Right
we
on.
are
Spot
at
on.
the,
Thank you.
the end slide. So thank you very much for your attention. There's my phone number and my email. If you want to get in touch with me, I would love to hear comments and feedback. And if you have any questions, I'm available.
So gracious of you to spend time with us today, Cliff. Does anybody have questions about Cliff's layout and his plans? And if you unshare the screen.
Yep. Hold on. Trying to get that
Yep, thank you, sir.
thing there. There we go. Come on. There we go.
Excellent. Questions or comments for Cliff? Cliff is just over the Richmond San Rafael Bridge in Alameda, and so he's a neighbor, although not a division member, and we can't thank him enough for coming in and enlightening us about what he's doing. Thank you.
Cliff,
Thank
a
you.
quick question.
Yes, go.
Sure.
Yeah, Dave Gibbons here at Hayward. I'm another guest of the division. I used to be up in your guys' territory. I moved down to Hayward. Anyway, if I look at the Google Maps, where are the tracks still to be found if I look at the railroad tracks running around in that area of Chicago?
So the Western Avenue corridor is, I believe, just a little bit west of Western Avenue. So that's
it.
2400 West.
Just found it. Thank you.
Yep. And the Cicero Avenue corridor is similar to that. The Altenheim branch, which connects Roby to sort of that M Manufacturers Junction, is largely abandoned. So you'd have to really do some eagle eyeballing, but I'd be happy to at some point go over that map with you and show you where everything is, if you'd like that.
Good. I'm good. I just wanted to get oriented, and I have done so. Thank you, sir.
Sure thing.
Thank you, Dave, for your question. Anybody else, comments or questions for Cliff, and then we'll move on.
Just my comment was the last one he built on the same thing was wonderful. So I'm looking forward to doing this.
Well, that's what we do, right? We build wonderful things and tear them out.
Of course.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't get it, but yes, it's a great plan. Exciting to see how that layout develops. Cliff made an early mistake. He chose N scale. I don't know. I'm not sure, whatever. But so we have to be encouraging in spite of that.
Not to
Okay,
mention the
okay,
choice of
okay.
Controllers.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Are you going to yell at me, Jim? You're muted if you're yelling at me.
No, I was gonna say in his choice of DCC systems, but he's
Yeah.
seen the light now, so.
What are you going to do? Are we not getting to see you because you're in your PJs still? Is that what's going on? Yeah, no, yeah, you're swearing at me, muted. So we'll move along. We'll continue
Thank you.
our magical mystery tour around the United States. Then our next presenter, Mike Latant, has been very involved with our layout here in Novato. And even though he's in San Francisco, is well known to many of us. Mike gave a presentation at our last meet about his research for our layout here regarding Willimantic, Connecticut. And I said, hey, Mike, this is pretty cool. Should we do a presentation about it? And he and I were a little worried. Who cares? Who cares about Willimantic, Connecticut? And Mike gave this presentation and people loved it. The feedback was unbelievable. I got all these notes. Loved the meet, particularly loved Michael Latant's talk about Willimantic. So we're doubling down because he's so good at this. And we're going to now talk about the Boston area. Mike has been very deeply involved in research surrounding South Boston. It's really cool. You've got the floor.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, everyone. You set the bar pretty high, so let's see how we do. Okay, well, today I want to talk about my favorite part of my favorite railroad, the New Haven Railroad and the South Boston Freight Terminal. Not that my railroad is any more special than yours, but it has some very interesting modeling elements that I'd like to show you this morning. Among them, the fan pier, connection over a swing bridge to a street running waterfront railroad that connected the New Haven with the Boston and Maine, a transfer bridge and car floats, main yard with a series of double slip switches, multiple yards, team tracks, LCL sheds and freight forwarders, a piggyback yard and an Army base and a Navy base annex and more. Give me a quick history on Boston Harbor. And back in Harrison's colonial days, Boston Harbor was a destination for shipping. And in the 1800s, as soon as the railroads could get out there, they all came out because of all the wharfs that studded the harbor. And when you get to about 1920 or so, you had them broken up this way. In East Boston, you had the New York Central via their Boston and Albany, Boston and Maine, north of Boston in Charlestown. In Boston itself, you had the Union Freight Railroad. And in South Boston, you had the New Haven. South Boston was a little late to the party because most of it was built on fill, but they got their share and they were quite a prosperous shipping port as well, at least until the late 60s or so. So here's a track plan of the South Boston Freight Terminal. And it's both compact and it's big. So much so that in the time I've got today, I'm just going to talk about the west side of it. And if there's enough interest, I'll talk about the east side on another day. I've switched over to a Bromley map, 1919 Bromley map from the Library of Congress map collection. The Bromley maps were similar to the Sanborn maps, but they don't show really the construction details. They do show the buildings at the time and who owned them. And we'll be coming back to this map a few times to point out some of these modeling elements. The first one I'd like to talk about is the fan pier, so-called because it spread out like a fan. It was also known as the grape yard or the grape pier because of many home winemakers bought grapes right off the refrigerator cars in winemaking season. The Boston Freight Terminal operated from the late 1800s right through to the early 1970s. And here's a illustration from 1906. And you can see that even in 1906, it was quite a going concern. I'm going to zoom in a little bit closer, show you a couple of things on it here. One is, if you'll notice around the circumference of the pier, we've got about a half dozen schooners of different sizes, and they could anchor right up to the wharf side. There was a track that ran right along it for easy loading and unloading. At this point in time, there was a grain elevator and later a coal dock. And even in 1906, there was a transfer bridge and car floats. I'll come back to that in just a minute, but that presented an interesting modeling situation. Here's the fan pier itself along Northern Avenue. And one of the first interesting structures that I found was this one right here, an open air freight shed. I'm going to come in a little closer on it. From an aerial survey, you can see one side is straight, one side is curved, just the right thing for those V-shaped areas in your yard. And here it is again. You can see the inside. It's an open air shed, just very scenic looking, and something to consider even for a freelance model. Want to call your attention over here to a couple of ventilated box cars, the so-called watermelon cars. And a lot of people think that they just showed up around the south. Well, no, they made it up to Massachusetts as well. Also, at this time on the Fan Pier, their end of track bumpers were made out of rocks and dirt. And that worked pretty well for the most part until it didn't. And they were later replaced with wheel stops and track bumpers.
It's a great picture.
Next thing of interest is the connection to the Union Freight Railroad along Northern Avenue. And here we're back at Fan Pier on the left, the New Haven's LCL sheds on the right. And right here in the middle, a runaround that connected the yard to the Northern Avenue Bridge. And this runaround was used both for the Fan Pier and for lining up the cars for the Union Freight run. This is an interesting bridge because the left side and the right side were used for traffic. The middle belonged to the railroad. That's where the tracks were. And so the connection was out of the yard on Northern Avenue and across the bridge and a right turn onto Atlantic Avenue. The Union Freight Railroad in itself, I could spend an entire presentation talking about this. It ran from the New Haven connection all the way up to the Boston and Maine connection alongside North Station through lots of narrow streets and lots of traffic. Because this is an early port city, because the railroads have been there for so long, the streets were narrow. So they had an interesting time, both the drivers and the train crew. This railroad, by the way, rostered some 3-truck Climax locomotives, shrouded, 44 tonners that they tried to replace the Climaxes with, but were unsuccessful. And finally, some leased Alco 1000 horsepower switchers. And there's a scene from the later years. One of the things that is my favorite thing about the Union Freight Railroad is going to come about when I build my railroad sometime in the near future. And visitors will say to me, yeah, it's nice, but that track spacing, that's just not prototypical. It's just too narrow. And I'll say, well, it's prototypical. So it's nice to have this to show people, copies on request.
Yeah.
I'm going to mention a few resources as I go along. If you're interested in seeing more about the Union Freight Railroad, seeing more pictures, I looked in the Boston archives and found some photos. Other cities are digitizing photos and digitizing documents, so I suggest you give it a try. The New Haven Historical and Technical Association put out an issue on the Union Freight Railroad. My key go-to for this is Frank Kuiper's book, The Railroad That Came Out at Night. Karstens discontinued this. The remaining stock was taken over by Arizona Hobbies. Very interesting book. If you decide to go to the used book market, make sure you get the second edition, which brings you up to date on some things. And Model Railroader in 2000 did a 4-part series on building this in HO, out of print. A lot of it wound up in this publication, and you can get that from Amazon. The actual HO layout itself wound up in a model railroad club near Cape Cod as a donation from the builder, who has since passed away. Next item of interest is the transfer bridge and the car floats. And there it is. During this period, it looks as though they had paved over part of the yard for the piggyback, left the bridge a little disconnected, but that's what it looked like. And here it is again with a car float. Now, normally, when you see these transfer bridges and car floats, they'd be used for interchanging cars across the harbor to another railroad, as they did in New York. But unlike New York, this was the only transfer bridge in Boston Harbor. So where did it go? What did it do? Well, part of the answer comes from the picture down below. And what's docked up to the float bridge is a platform float, which is typically used when you're going to load and unload cars without rolling them off the other end of the car float. So went to another resource, Shorpy, which is a great way to spend a few hours. It's an archive of lots of historical photos, many with train content. I did a search, came up with one of Boston Harbor, again back in 1906. I called that up, I zoomed in on it a little, and there's my answer. That in this case, box cars and in later years, refrigerator cars were taken out on the car floats right up to the ships. They were used to unload from the ships to the cars and taken right back to the same transfer bridge. In later years, the refrigerator cars most often unloaded bananas and tropical fruits from South America, both to speed the perishable fruit on its way, and also, I'm told, to avoid paying dock worker wages for the unloading. The freight houses and the freight forwarders. The New Haven had two freight houses along Northern Avenue. These were their own, and this is where they handled the less than carload lot, and they were quite busy right up near the end. There also were several other freight houses nearby. These were a combination of the railroads freight houses and ones that freight forwarders, shippers, and truckers shared as well. And one of the interesting features here was that Congress Street ran right through the middle of those freight sheds and across 9 or 10 tracks and across some other tracks as well. Something that if you did it on your railroad, people would say it's not prototypical, but there it is. So here is the fan pier, which you'll notice at this time was kind of winding down its operations, but the LCL freight houses, the New Haven's freight houses, were still quite busy, and they were doing a good business right up until almost the end. One of the freight forwarders that became large enough to move out of the freight shed and create their own facility was Lifschultz Fast Freight. And it's a great little building, 4 inside tracks, a great opportunity for switching cars in and out. And here again is Congress Street continuing to run across several other tracks. Again, just a very nice little element that you might use. To get some of these photos, I used a resource that I had not really used much before. It's railpictures.net. And it gives you a lot of ways to search for photos, locomotive, railroad, location, photographer. And you might think that, this might not have very much that would interest you in terms of railroads, but the list of railroads that you can select from is quite extensive. Current class 1 and passenger railroads, regionals and short lines, fallen flags, which is where I found my New Haven photos, and leasing companies. So very, very easy to spend a few happy hours on here. Double slip switches were not uncommon in passenger yards. In fact, at South Station, which was right across Fort Point Channel from the Boston Freight Terminal, they had a number of slip switches, and they had a classic 2-story tower for the operator to stay in out of the elements and watch the action. Here are some of the slip switches in the freight yard itself. And there's the mechanical rodding for them. So you might assume that they had a similar 2-story enclosed tower for the operator. They didn't really. By the way, here is Freight House 6 in the background. The original Freight House 6, it burned and was replaced by a concrete building. And here's one of the slip switches. But where is that 2-story enclosed tower? Well, let's zoom in a little bit. And it was actually a 1-story open air facility. You can see the switch levers I wanted to see a little bit more of it. So I was able to find another photo, taken from about the same location. And there it is, just a really nice little building that if you have the opportunity and the use for it, it would fit right in. And here is our nerves of steel operator, hand on the lever. And something I wanted to mention with this, by the way, this is from the Boston Public Library's collection on Flickr, and good number of photos there as well. Even with PowerPoint, which I'm using, you can play with the brightness, the contrast, and the sharpness of the photos, not as much as with photo editing software, but as you can see, I was able to play with this a little and show off the bells that alerted the operator to come on out of his comfy little shack and throw some switches. I mentioned before there was an Army and a Navy annex, and I've switched over to a map of the Inner Harbor. This was from Map Junction, which is which was for me was an excellent source of aerial photos, maps, and atlases. And there is the New Haven's government yard. There was actually another yard right next to it, the State and Commonwealth yard, but this was the yard that fed the Army base down here with some interesting trackage. And the Naval Annex. This is a 1945 map, so you can see that it was pretty built up during wartime. Here is an aerial photo. You can see the fan pier again in the upper left. There is the New Haven's piggyback yard. This is 1962. There is the combined government yard and the State and Commonwealth yards. The Naval Annex with lots of visitors, and the Army base. So if you have got some military ships, you got some cargo ships, and you've been wanting to show them off with your railroad, there's a way that you can do it. This is a larger view of the Army base and a photo showing a little bit of the trackage. Again, just quite an interesting arrangement and would lend itself to a shelf layout. Well, I've shown you some interesting features of the east side of the freight terminal. This is the west side. And in fact, this is where I found the area that I wanted to model, which I'll get around to one of these days. But my time is just about up. So if there is enough interest, I will come on back and visit with you, talk to you about the other side of the Boston Freight Terminal. And we'll just consider this as to be continued. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Michael. Really excellent. Unshare the screen. There were a couple of questions that went by on the chat, which the speaker often just can't have a chance to process while they're speaking. One maybe is serious and maybe is facetious, but the question is about, well, the wording of the question was, where did they throw the tea in the water? So I'm going to rephrase that. Is it, I Googled it while you were speaking. The Boston Tea Party Museum seems to be on a little island thing just north of Congress Street. So really dead center. I mean, tremendous history in that area.
There were three bridges that they built: Summer Street Bridge, Congress Street Bridge, and the Northern Avenue Bridge, that really connected South Boston to commercial Boston. And that's what spurred its development and the filling of the flats. The Boston Tea Party ship was right off the Congress Street Bridge, which you can see on Google Maps.
I just looked for it. It is in fact there. So we've answered that question. And Phil had a question. Phil's visiting from the Coast Division. We're honored and overjoyed that you're here. You were asking Phil about the goods moving in and out of Fan Pier. Do you feel that question was answered, or should we pursue that further?
Yeah, so I was just curious. It seemed like it was pretty inefficient to park the cars at that orthogonal to where the ships were. And they had the one track that went around the outside, but kind of what was the purpose of the cars in the Fan Pier, and in the fan where they were parked there, where did the goods move to from those cars? Was it to ships exclusively or?
No, that was one of several, what I would call team track yards. A lot of the receivers picked up their goods right from the freight cars, and some of the shipping did go out and were loaded onto the cars. Boston and New England, I'm afraid, suffered over the years to the movement of textiles and other manufactured items down to the south, and the truckers taking a lot of the other equipment. At one time, by the way, Boston was the wool center of the United States. And they received a lot more than they shipped. Unfortunately, that meant a lot of empty backloads for the New Haven, but makes for a great modeling scene because you get a variety of freight cars from a variety of railroads. I myself saw cars from the Savannah and Atlanta and the Manufacturers Railroad at different times.
And also just an observation, you and I have talked about Boston, and I'm a Bostonian by birth. All these tracks that you talked about today are gone. All of them are gone. Is that correct?
Everything. I had a photo I was going to conclude with that showed what the fan pier looks like today, but it was too sad for me to.
It's all gone. And
Everything's gone.
And is it fair to say, for all practical purposes, freight railroading in downtown Boston is gone?
Well, Paul, a lot of it happened when the New Haven Railroad was absorbed into another railroad based in New York and Pennsylvania. I think you know which one that is.
Indeed.
And they opted to move the freight via the Beacon Park Yard and Worcester, and pretty much choked off both the Union Freight Railroad and the Boston Freight Terminal. But they were both still around till the 1970s. So they were there for quite a while.
Amen. Anybody else questions for Michael while we have him?
Just a quick thing. This is Dave Gibbons.
Hi.
For those that go into Google, Fan Pier Park is still there and shows the shape. And the only trackage I can see that's left is where Northern Avenue approaches the southwest end of the old Northern Avenue Bridge. You can see some tracks in a short stretch of about 100 foot by 100 foot where they have two tracks that they didn't rip out at the south end of the bridge, and that seems to be it.
That is about it. And in fact, the area that I will be modeling now has the South Boston Convention Center sitting over the entire footprint. So just gonzo, everything gone, but not forgotten.
Not forgotten. Well said. Thank you, Michael. Really generous of you again to give us a nice presentation that you obviously spent a lot of time on. Thank you. Thank you.
So Paul, I just have one question. How much of this are you planning on modeling?
It amounts to about 5 blocks, but they're very busy blocks. And as I say, if there's enough interest, I'll come on back and talk about that part of the Boston Freight Terminal, which included a produce terminal, local businesses, street running, a pocket yard, lots of great stuff in a small amount of space.
Terrific. Thank you, Michael. Next up, Ray Lorber. I hope you're ready for us, Ray. One of the great things about these meets is that we get to bring together people from far and wide and local. Ray, you're here in San Rafael. And I don't know that you've presented about your layout before, so I'm overjoyed that you let us drag you in and tell us what you're doing. Ray has done some extraordinary work here on our layout in Novato, and I would love to see what else you're doing.
Thank you, Paul. I have to admit, I am intimidated with the 2 previous presentations. My layout is relatively small compared to theirs. I want to give a little history about who I am and where I came from. I started out with, when I was a child, with this, I have a hard time getting fingers on it, with the model railroad.
We can't quite see
here.
Yeah.
And when I left, I joined the Army and I left that, I gave my model railroad away to a cousin of mine. How come that doesn't focus right? And this is an engine well, 40 years, I gave it to my cousin, went off to the Army and forgot about it, no longer involved in model railroading. And I came back 40 years later, went to his house, and his total basement was full of model railroads, including my engine, which I had given him, which I'm trying to focus on and not doing it very poorly. Don't know why it doesn't focus better.
Take a giant step away. Try that. It's not much. Yeah, it's not. That didn't work.
Not working. Okay. Hope we do better. A couple of pictures I have of the Baltimore, Ohio, which I have modeled after, is it's not working at all. I wonder why it much color. This is Cincinnati.
Turning your camera, turn your camera on and off. And do you have virtual any background
Yeah,
on?
it's the blur. That's right.
Turn off your virtual background blur.
I blurred the virtual background. Yes, thank you. I'll take care of that.
When there's no discernible human being, it blurs everything.
There we go. Okay, this is, I grew up in Riverdale, Maryland, by the Baltimore, Ohio Railroad. And this is a local passenger station, which I have modeled. And this is the Cincinnati.
It's 12 o'clock.
Going through Riverdale. Cincinnati would go from Baltimore to Chicago overnight. And it was the last major speed freight train before the diesel took over. A very significant train. I got my idea of how to model my train set from track plans. And I took my model from this layout right here. This is designed for 4x8. My layout is 5x9, but it came out pretty well. This design is comes up in the center and it kind of blocks the view from the trains in the background. So I reversed it and I have it go down in the center rather than coming up. One of the significant things in my railroad are the trusses. I have two major trestles. One is a deck truss, which you all are very familiar with. And I have a lot of them on my set. The other one is the picturesque straining beam pony truss. And this straining beam is the beams are above rather than below the track. And you put this in an area where there's no room below the track to have your supports. So you put them above the track. As an example, there's my pony truss. I used CTI. The reason I got in, back up a little bit, the reason I got into this model is having the engine returned to me from my cousin. I went to Sacramento and looked at their layout there, which is dramatic, and picked up a magazine that promoted using a computer on your train set. So me being a computer guy, an electronics guy, had to go with that design. So here's CTI, the software that I use. I'm going to start the set now. Some of the things that I have in my set, here's a crossing gate. At the entrance to a tunnel. Looking through the tunnel, you can see the train in the far background.
That's cool.
I have a lot of trestles on here. There's two of them. Each trestle took about a year to build. It's a 10-year project, what you're looking at here. Down in the center, I have coal mine. If you're going to model after Boulder, Ohio, you have to have a coal mine. I converted my set from DC to DCC. For those who have not done it or are thinking about it, it's a tough job. I have a pretty solid background in electronics. When I was in the military, I took a radar repair class, 12 months training. And I know a lot about electronics, but it was a challenge. On top, I have a water scene with grandpa, his grandson in the boat. And over here, there's a lot of railroad, a baseball game going on with a town center. My version of the Riverdale B&O Passenger Station. Other than letting the train run, Paul, I don't know what else I can tell you about.
Well, let's open it for questions, Ray. My question, I'm familiar with your work on trestles, but I wanted to amplify the fact that you said each of your trestles took a year to build. That's pretty amazing.
I was working at the time, so it wasn't full time.
That's good. That's good. That's good. Yeah, but nevertheless, that's very impressive. Anybody else questions or comments for Ray?
Just one quick comment. I have seen Ray's layout, and it is very nicely done. Very nicely done, and especially the trestles. I was just wildly impressed with them when I saw them.
I'm sure Ray would be happy to be a resource to anybody else who's scratch building bridges or trestles. Very knowledgeable and made a great contribution here in Novato too. If there are no other questions for Ray, thank you immensely, Ray, for sharing. We're thrilled to have you. We hope you'll come back with more to share. The next guy up, therefore, is Tom Swearingen. Tom, I know you've been standing by eagerly, and you know, I'm sitting in the hood here, Tom.
Okay, you got my my PowerPoint up?
I hope it's yours. Southern
Okay,
Pacific.
cool.
Yeah.
I didn't know if you could see it or not. Okay,
Yes, we
well,
can. Go.
thanks, Paul. This is a story about painting backdrop of the Central Vermont in Novato. And the story begins back in 2006 when I was trying to paint the backdrop on my model railroad at the time, and it stunk. I just didn't like anything about it. So I ended up buying a book on sketching, buying a book on painting, and I got hooked on painting. I retired in 2007 from a full-time job and began painting part-time. And so obviously, being into trains, the things I started painting were trains. And these are paintings I completed over time, got in galleries in Marin, Sonoma, Napa, Sacramento, but this is what I painted. I didn't paint
Hey, Tom.
Yes.
Tom, I got to stop you because I want to make sure it's clear to everybody that what you're showing us is not photographs. This is your original artwork.
Yes, these are photos. I mean, these are photos of my paintings, excuse me, that I've done. So I'll leave it on, excuse me, here for a bit. So yeah, so I'm not a landscape painter. I paint trains, and then the galleries wanted more, so I started painting some still life. And of course, if you're from Sonoma County, you can, if that's a Napa Valley wine, actually paint wine and write it off on your taxes if you sell it in galleries. So I painted a lot of wine. So when Paul asked me if I'd be willing to do the backdrop on the Central Vermont, I said, of course, I'd love to do that. But with the caveat that it's going to be somewhat of a learning process. And so when Paul and I first got together, I asked him, what is your expectation? And he said initially, let's create some depth. So the photo I have here is just one taken up in Mendocino County, and it kind of illustrates what we're trying to do on the Central Vermont. You see that down here in the vanishing point, all lines point in this direction, and the clouds are very small here, and then they increase in size as you go up to 2 dimensions vertically. And then also it's a lot lighter blue here than, and it's darker blue up there. So that's where we started. So this is actually right next to where Paul's sitting, slightly behind him. And this is where I started. I started in the back room where people would see, wouldn't see it, so I could make all my mistakes back there. And I was happy with this. So you can see that it's lighter blue here than it is up at the top. And I did this with oils. I went through the process of spreading gesso on there and then painting oils. Oils are great because they blend and they take a long time to dry. I was happy with it, and I painted what I thought would be a May springtime color. And then Jim Providenza, who also invited me to do this, said, that's great, Tom, thanks. But May back where we're painting looks a little bit more like this. So time to regroup. And again, very, very patient. So when you look at this photo here, obviously you're not seeing the green that I painted this is all seeing bare trees. But if you look carefully, you're going to see maroons, you're going to see pinks over here, you're going to see some leafing, and then you've got the evergreens in the background. So I kind of went back over some of it and began painting that. And I'll describe my process a little bit here. So these are just some photos of what we've done so far. And I'm driving Paul nuts because I'm telling him, yeah, I some of the stuff, when I do it, I'm going to go back over and redo it. I'm not very satisfied at all with Palmer, but this is the way Palmer kind of looks right now. Just some random photographs of the backdrop. And trying to blend it in with some of the scenery too. And I purposely blurred the background on these because the focus is actually on the model railroad. It's not on the backdrop. And so let me get to my process here. So the one thing about clouds, go back here a little bit. It's really cool. I see Dave Grunman's thunderstorm in his background. The cool thing about clouds is, like many things in model railroad, there's a prototype for every cloud you can paint out there. So this is not far from where Paul's sitting on the layout. It's what I do with the process is initially, like I said, I started with oils. I got tired of painting with the oils. I just went there initially because I could blend the paints easier. And so I went and bought Kelly Moore paint and a blue custom blue that I like, and I began painting that. And I can lighten the horizon of the blue using a little bit of white, titanium white, and glazing it over there, which I'll do here later on. But I begin with the blue, I add the clouds, and then I start with a dark background and I lighten it up as it comes forward. And that's how I'm trying to create depth here. This is not finished. And the clouds, I change those over time. Anyway, everything on the layout, when you're painting, it's like, I think Jim Providenza and Bill Kaufman, you can correct me. You call it spaghetti scenery, where if you don't like it, you add more, and then you add more, and you keep adding more. Well,
it's meatball. It's meatball.
Meatball. Thank you. Spaghetti. It's close. So
meatballs. What do you want?
There you go. Anyway, it's pretty much the same thing. You go back and you can change it. You can paint over it. It's not like the still life that I used to do. So my process here is I use a Stay Wet palette. The Stay Wet palette is a sponge and a piece of treated paper on top of it. The paper stays wet, but it doesn't allow the paper to absorb the paint. And then you can cover it up and it'll stay wet for days. And leaving it open like this, you can walk away from it with acrylics and they'll stay wet for hours. So brushes, I use all sorts of brushes. I find these cheap little brushes that you can get at Home Depot or anywhere are excellent for scrumbling and making trees and branches like that over there. I like Liquitex Heavy Body. It's just, I've painted with every acrylic paint that's out there, and that's my favorite. The pigmentation is great, and they flow really well. So this is the goal. Where Paul is sitting right now, directly off to his right, is Palmer. And there's this unique hill in Palmer that I painted, but frankly, I didn't want to show that right now because I'm not happy with it. And there's a beautiful coaling tower that Paul made that. Jim Providenza made that, correct?
Yes.
Beautiful, beautiful coaling tower. I'm going to set this up for the photo. I'm going to be coming back and giving you updates over time as this progresses, because this is just a learning process for me and I'm having a hoot. But the trackage, the cars, the cooling tower, it's all there. What I need to do is create this hump a little bit better than I have. And my plan is to fly back to Boston and someplace my wife had never been at the beginning of May, and take some photographs of the trees and the areas where we're modeling, and take the photographs that I need to complete this project. It's 600 linear feet, which is obviously the biggest canvas I've ever painted. So anyway, that's it. Any questions, comments?
And also I've tried to, if you unshare the screen, I've tried to orient my camera so you can get a sense of the scene. I think everybody could see it if they choose.
Yeah, Tom, what's your background material? Is it masonite or treated board of some sort?
Paul, what's my background material?
Well, you're right. 600 linear feet, it's varying. The vast majority of it is masonite backdrop.
And what I did, I just took, again, initially I wanted gesso because gesso provides a nice tooth for paint and it lasts a long time. But I realized that basically for what we're doing and the acrylics I'm using, Kelly Moore's paint works just fine. Somebody also asked me about the treated paper. If you go to an art store and ask for a Stay Wet, or just go on Dick Blick or any of the art resources online, look for this, it's called Stay Wet, STA-wet palettes. And they sell the paper with those palettes. And you need the sponge and the paper both.
And so, Tom, let's talk about your incredibly advanced skill set in painting and all of the rest of us. Do you feel a dimwit can go ahead and paint a backdrop with no training or expertise or self-taught genius like you have?
Well, I am a dimwit and I did it, but it needs a little bit of improvement. Actually, if I could start painting, anybody can paint. I was a stick figure person. I had no artistic skills at all. I didn't take any art classes in high school. I didn't know anything. I bought these two books, and one was Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain by Betty Edwards, and that's where it began. And then I bought her color book and I started painting. And, you know, I know it sounds trite, but if I can do it, anybody can do it. It's just a little bit of time.
And the message is just try it, because if you don't like it, you'll do it again.
And yeah, right next to you. I'm going to do that again, Paul. Sorry.
No, I like it. I like it. Sorry. We're loving it.
So,
Quick
yeah,
question for
how long
Tom.
did it take you to paint one of those things, like the BNSF mainline intermodal train? How long does it take to paint that?
You know, that was probably, no exaggeration, I want to say probably 100 hours. Yeah, and I paint from photographs. Yeah, when you're doing detail like that, it takes a long time. I mean, I'm slow. I am slow. I'm sure there's artists out there that can crank these things out a lot quicker. I'm just not one of them.
Tom, you are a very patient man. Most of us could never be that patient to get that product.
Thanks, Ron. Thank you very much.
Even worse, you'll do excellent work here. And as you said, you'll do it again because you didn't like it. And
Yeah, in regard
here
to
I
that-
am. I show it off to visitors because it's amazing. And you're like, no, I don't like it. I don't know.
A quick question for Tom.
Go ahead.
Tom, how do you address the issue that if you look straight ahead at a photograph and paint it, but then the people there in Paul's layout are 20 foot off to the left and looking at sideways at it? Do you worry about perspective on the painting, viewing from the side view versus viewing straight on? How much of an issue is that for you?
It's an issue. It is something that I struggle with. That hill that is behind the coaling tower, you only get that perspective in one spot. And so when you paint it for that one spot, it's going to look wrong from every other spot. It's not going to look real. So I don't know how to, you can't fix that. You just can't fix it. And there's another spot on Paul's layout that Jim and Paul actually wanted me, Jim wanted me to look at first. It's the crossing with the, Paul, what cross is there? Is that
It's Palmer, Mass. Yes, it's the Boston and Albany crosses of Central Vermont and a famous diamond at Palmer. And because Boston Albany is running almost perpendicular, it goes right straight into the backdrop. And that's what are we going to do? That's a challenge. We've talked a lot about it.
So you can't paint yourself around, you can't paint around that because it'll be right from 1 square inch on the layout and that's it. But, David, you just can't fix that. And yeah, I do worry about it. Maybe that's why I repaint some of the stuff.
Anybody else? Questions for Tom, please?
Tom, how'd you get the train to stay still like that so long?
Yeah.
Great. Anybody else? Thank you, Tom. We love it. We appreciate it
All
so
right, thanks.
much. And I suppose if anybody was daunted about painting their own backdrop, you could be a resource, no doubt.
And anytime, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, moving ahead at speed. Bill Kaufman, you're up.
Oh, it's me?
It's
Oh,
you.
All right, let me get my thing up here. I just had it. There it is. And we will go from the beginning. All right. I need to share this somehow. How the hell do I share it?
Dead center at the bottom of your window.
There it is. There it is. I just found it. Okay. And I want to share that one. Been in this mess before and from the beginning. Okay, there I am. This is a layout that isn't there anymore. It's been gone 15 years. So anybody who wants to complain about it, that's it. That's too bad. San Francisco and Colorado, never got to either one of those places. That's very traditional, lots of names. And so here's an overview. I want to talk a little bit about this. It was a small layout, even at the time. It was 12 by 12, which is what the current one is. Which is why the current one is 12 by 12, because we just took over the space. It was in a garage in Northern California in San Rafael. It was very rural. You could look out the door and look at the scenery. And I began building it with my daughter, who was about 13 or 14 at the time. The idea was I didn't want her to be a constructor, but my thought was, if you're going to choose something, you shouldn't, you ought to be able to say, no, I didn't want to do that, not I couldn't. So anyhow, it was torn down about 15 years ago. And here's what it looked like. It was, there was a town up high called Baird. Oh, wait a minute, I gotta get this thing the heck out of my way. There we go. The town called Baird, the Baird Yard. There's an engine house in Baird. There's a connection to the NWP over here. The oil patch was the first town you came to coming out of Baird. I had gone to the Naval Academy for a while, and so when I found a town called Annapolis up in the not far from the end of the NWP, I said, "Oh, I got to do that." There's nothing here officially, but there's cows on the hill here. Hughes Quarry we'll look at pictures of. Up here is Little King or Pequeño. It went through a number of names at various points, and so did a whole lot of this stuff come up with other names. This car float we'll see again and again, not here, but on my current layout, and we had another engine house. The whole idea was that this was 1929 as it should have been, not as it was. There's a general store with a gas station in front of it. There's, you'll recognize some old buildings here that were parts of various kits. There's a nice gazebo in the center of town. There's just all sorts of things. This is a very, very, as I said, 1929 as it should have been, not as it was. Just very bucolic, very, very nice. This is the actual yards up there. Baird is way off. The town is way off in the distance. This is Baird Yard. If you go out here, I don't know if you can see the point here, but if you go off here, you end up to the NWP. This is the Baird engine house and turntable. All sorts of an assortment of engines, what have yous, Lord knows what all. Not quite sure why this guy doesn't have any tracks under him. This all started when Paul was listening to me sort of showing off some slides from in his place, and he said, "Oh, you want to do that for the RED meeting?" I said, "Sure, why not?" But I went and looked and cleaned it up a little bit. So anyhow, I did have a lot of sort of people and things. Here's some old guy riding along. He's got his dog and his thing, and there's, it's just a very, very sort of bucolic, that's how it was kind of layout. You can work in Baird a little bit. This is the town. We have this is kind of the beginning of the lineup. You can see some of that. Here's the whole lineup. This is the town over here. These are all of those buildings that we talked about. And there's a blacksmith shop. That's part of it all too. This was kind of like, what can you build? Well, I can build a little of this, I can build a little of that, I can put a little of this together, I can put a little of that together. And we got, somebody talked about a baseball game on their layout, and we had full-on baseball game on the way out of town. I mean, that's kind of like how 1929 should have been. Again, every town, as I remember, I don't remember it personally, but my understanding was that every town had its own little town baseball team. And also, if you don't make it, here's the town cemetery in Baird. And here's the Baird passenger station. And there's a junkyard across the way. The whole idea was we're headed finally out of town and we're going to turn. Here's the passenger station again. If we follow around, we end up in Oil Patch, which is these buildings over here. We'll see. Here's a lovely downtown Oil Patch. all sorts of wonderful old things that kits that I picked up, threw them together. I had some nice tree kits, so I learned how to build a tree, and there's some more oil patch. We learned how to make decals and that sort of thing, and so a little bit of a team track. This was another kit from somebody, so we put all of that together. This is the party train. This is I've called a party train or a festive train or something, but somebody built that all. And we're going into Annapolis. This had some other names at various times, but Annapolis is where it ended up. Here's our cows. We have 2 or 3 cows up there. And the party train going on along. Various things fell down, and that's how they looked. Crossing, we came this way on the top one. Now we're coming on the bottom one. We're going that way, headed out of Annapolis. Some guy is sitting there on his porch reading things. There's another fishing shack along the way. Eventually, I built this nice lighthouse for my wife, who was a lighthouse person, and had to put a little space in there, and I put a little, this was somebody's kit, and I threw it all together. What was important along here was something called Q's Quarry, and it's kind of a very fun thing. I won the kit bashing for this wonderful quarry monster. And the beginning of it, the basic notion is, how could you do that? What was the kit that you began with? And because there's pieces of this and pieces of that and pieces of some other things and pieces of third things and just, but there wasn't any really kit that got bashed. This is coming through the town called Little King. It also gets called Queño. This is the festive train coming into Little King, passing through Little King. This is a friend of mine built the good ship Holly K. This is my wife's name. And this is a pier down here. This is the car float that we end up using again as a theoretical car float that worked for it works on the state belt, which is what I've eventually created. This is the engine house at Little King. And there we go, looking out the door. This is the garage door, by the way. This is what we're looking at. And we actually operated. Of course, that was what I guess was the death of everything. We operated the San Francisco and Colorado some too. We used car cars and waybills and all the stuff that we should have. We got all the right forms. We got train order and Form 19s and Form A's and yada, yada, yada. So we actually ran it just the way it should be. You had a dispatcher sheet. And here are Vern and Dr. Ed, who I believe are both here today, making up a mess of something. And this is my friend Philip and his brother-in-law trying to sort out Baird. And that is the San Francisco and Colorado story.
How great, Bill. I'm so glad you shared that.
Yeah, well, I'm glad, has anybody got any, if anybody's got any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them, but
mine is more a comment, appreciation for all of the micro scenes that were part of that layout. When you drill down into the micro scenes, it feels like it must be 5 times the size of the 12 by 12 you described. Really neat and very inspirational.
Thank you. It was great fun to do. I worked on it. I built, it took about 14 years to get that right. And then I finally tore it down, and then now we're 14 years into the new layout. I'm beginning to look at it a little askance.
Fantastic. If there's no other questions or comments for Bill, we'll keep going. We're doing great. I promised these calls would not last longer than an hour and a half, but I see almost all of you are hanging in there, and we have some great additional presentations coming up. So stick with us. We'll keep moving along. Adam Palmer, we're overjoyed to have you on board, Adam, to talk about some of your work and also your business. So please, Adam, the floor is yours.
All right, hello. All right, so yeah, lately I've been really getting into weathering stuff for my own. You'll see the comment I left there for my my new layout, the Sierra Central Railway. My old layout was very much inspired by Bill's old layout, but this new layout is much better designed and is a bit of a later era as well. But anyways, the layout itself is a presentation for another day, but I'm just going to show off some weathering projects that I did for some engines and rolling stock that I did on this layout. And okay, so some weathering projects. Let's see what I'm doing. Okay. Again, these are a few weathering projects I completed on some locomotives and rolling stock for my layout, the Sierra Central Railway. Essentially what this is, again, the layout itself is a presentation for another day, but it's in the great tradition of proto-freelance model railroads, it's a bridge line that runs from Merced, California to Coos Bay, Oregon, and has connections with all these different railroads and has all these different branch lines and that sort of thing. Essentially what I did is, and you'll see this reflected in the paint scheme of the locomotives, is I took the Virginian and Ohio and turned it from an Appalachian coal hauler into a West Coast lumber hauler. So that's essentially what the Sierra Central Railway is in concept, but you'll see in practice. So the first thing I want to focus on, as far as my weathering projects are concerned, is some of the I tried to replicate some prototype images for locomotives. So the first one here is a WP 805D, which was an FP7, a California Zephyr unit. But I modeled it and weathered it as it appeared after the end of the California Zephyr in freight service. So the engine here in this photo, which I just found online, it's pulling the WP auto parts train that ran to Milpitas. So I think that was a common assignment that these passenger units had in their freight days. And as you can see over here, I took a Genesis unit and weathered it to as it appeared in this picture, at least a pretty close facsimile. I added a few of my own things as well, but you'll see I really like heavy weathering on stuff like on this sort of stuff, and I do really like kind of passenger units at the end of their lives. So this next one is Sacramento Northern 712, which is a GP7, and the blue and white units are SCR units, and you'll see those in a bit more detail coming up. But I weathered this one kind of based on the image you see here, which has some paint peeling and that sort of stuff. And I'll add to my basic kind of technique for weathering. I'm very much inspired by the likes of Jim Hediger, Malcolm Furlow, Gordon Odegaard, so on and so forth, and also videos I'll see online. So basically what I'll do is I'll give the engine just a quick spray with a matte coat. Then I'll use an airbrush to kind of with a light gray to kind of take the jet black off the running gear and also fade the paint a bit on the whole engine. And then I'll come in with a kind of mud color for some road grime on the running gear mainly, and also on the lower parts of the pilots and so on and so forth. Then I'll come back with a black, and I'll kind of get the initial sort of exhaust grime on the roof and that sort of thing. And then I'll come through with weathering powders and dry brushing and stippling to get the grime on the grills and more on the roof. And sometimes I'll have some streaking going down the sides, which you'll see, but that's just my basic technique that I'll say for the time being. So now here are the SCR GP9s. And one thing I need to make very clear is I did not repaint these units. The actual painting was done by a guy named Nico in Petaluma. He has his own business, Sonoma Custom Models, I think it's called. He'll do repaints, weathering, DCC installs, upgrades, that's super detailing, that sort of stuff. So I had him upgrade all these units, and well, I had him repaint all these units, and these are Genesis WP GP9s. So and that caboose you'll see a bit later. It's a Rapido CP Angus van that I did up for my own purposes. So another shot of the GP9s. This is a pair of them sitting in the yard on my layout. So this is probably one of my favorites here. This is an SW1200, and as you can see by the light package, it's a former SP unit. And so I had Nico repaint this, and it took him, I mean, it's a Rapido engine, so it's got a lot of details and stuff like that. So it took him a while, but it really came out nicely. And of course, I weathered it up with my usual techniques, and I really wanted to do a number on this one. So all the grills are super dirty, and there's streaking coming down the sides and that sort of stuff. But this is probably one of my favorite engines on my layout right now. And this one was a bit more of a recent project. I had this another Rapido Seaboard System B36-7. It's a bit late era for my railroad. I'm kind of doing a bit, again, like the Virginia, Ohio, I'm doing kind of a mid-70s sort of thing. But I decided, you know what, I'll make this a patch unit. So I just decaled some SCR patches on there and kept the engine and weathered it up and so on and so forth. This is more of a mid-range weathering job as opposed to the switcher that you saw before. So here are some other weathering projects. I wanted, in kind of a similar fashion to how Jim Providenza has his Santa Cruz Northern, there's going to be a lot of WP and Santa Fe run-through power. So I have this WP GP40-2 that I would consider this a light weathering job on it because, you know, at this, these would be relatively new at this point in time. And then I also did this very heavy weathering job on this Southern Pacific NW2 switcher. So, all right. Hopefully I'm not going too fast, am I? Okay. Yeah, I have a problem with that. Anyways.
No, speed is good.
Okay, all right. And this is the one steam engine that I've weathered, at least using the airbrush, and that I'm not embarrassed to show off. This is the one weathering job on a steam engine I've done so far. This is a Broadway Limited Paragon 4 Santa Fe Mikado that I got the undecorated version so I could, you know, make it a Sierra Central engine, engine number 3525 here. And as you can see, it's got the smoke unit and everything. And I think this is actually the first sort of major weathering project I did on a locomotive with my airbrush. So at least I think it turned out pretty well. Unfortunately, the engine is currently at Broadway Limited Imports repair department after suffering a snapped rod. So that's going to be out of commission for a while, but I'll get it back eventually. But I think it looks pretty good. So now we're moving off of locomotives and we're going to check out a few caboose projects that I did. This is a Santa Fe caboose that I that I weathered actually based on some pictures I found online. So I know that Santa Fe generally kept these cars pretty clean, but I found a few pictures where these were pretty grimy. So I did this one based on those pictures. And this caboose actually came from, I traded this one out with a few pieces of rolling stock from a guy in Oakland named Miles Callan, who has a custom model railroad business as well. Like he will actually go out and like build your layout if you can afford it. And he has his own like concept railroad as well. But I would check out his YouTube channel, Interurban Era, in order to see what that is. So here's a couple SCR cabooses. Here's that Canadian Pacific Angus van that you saw earlier. This was an undecorated unit that I received from a friend. I bought off of a friend and upgraded, and painted and weathered it in the fashion you see here. And here's a Union Pacific caboose that I painted into my railroad's paint scheme as well. Some other rolling stock projects. I was particularly glad to have found this boxcar on the left here, the Cat Mountain Santa Fe car. I consider myself a bit of a collector of other sort of model railroad equipment. So I have this Cat Mountain Santa Fe car. I have recently got a car from a layout called the Lakeside Lines, and I got one for the Virginia and Ohio. So I'm trying to kind of get a bit of a collection going. And here's a Sierra Central slightly more modern 50-foot boxcar that I painted and weathered in a similar fashion as well. And here's a few other projects. Here's a SPFE reefer that I did. And I got a couple 40-foot cars here. So here's a SP double door boxcar. And my technique with that one, I discovered, I did a couple sort of scrape marks where the door would have scraped on the body. And then to kind of dull all the colors down, I did this sort of airbrush paint fading and road grime on the running gear. But when it came to the actual weathering powders, what I would do is I would just like dump a bunch on and then smear it all out with my finger. And it turned out and it came out with a very interesting kind of result. And unfortunately, I don't have any pictures of the roof, but it looks pretty good, I think. And this is kind of exemplified again with this Rock Island boxcar, the same sort of smear technique. And this Wairika Western Incentive Per Diem boxcar, I gave the roof a pretty good rust job, and if you see it in person, I think it looks pretty good. So I'm actually particularly proud of this one. And lastly, I have this Santa Fe 40-foot boxcar that I did the same smear technique on, and that's it. If you're interested in my services, feel free to send me an email. I also have a website where I kind of outline what's there, what the costs are, how the process works, my techniques, and so on and so forth. And that's about it.
Adam, thank you for sharing. Questions or comments for Adam from anybody?
I guess I'll bite. He's offering services. What do you charge?
It is $25 per car and $50 per locomotive. And it's like, if you want me to like upgrade your couplers to KDs, that's another $5.
And what's your turnaround time like these days, Adam?
Depends on the shipping time, but it's actually pretty quick. I've observed that I can weather a car probably within like an hour and a half, and a locomotive maybe a couple hours.
Right. So for those of us who may be interested, maybe a week turnaround is reasonable.
Yeah, something like that. It's just
Okay. Well, it's not 3 months. Okay, good. Thank you so much for sharing, Adam. And thank you everybody for hanging in with us. Most people have hung in with us. We have 3 more on the official agenda, and let's keep going at speed. Joe Devaney has offered to say a couple of things. Joe, you're still with us, I think.
Yeah, I am. I'm not sure how to display anything here, but
Well, if you're sharing your screen, it's dead center at the bottom. There's a share screen button that's green.
share screen.
Worked. It's working. I'm not sure what we're seeing, but we're seeing something.
Why don't you stop sharing your screen?
Okay.
Click stop sharing, and when you share it, and then put stop sharing, it's up at the
Yeah.
up at the top. Up at the top, there'll be kind of a red button when you move your mouse up to the top of the
Yeah.
screen.
Red button.
Yeah, up towards the top.
Yeah.
Just click stop share. There you go. Okay, now click share screen down at the bottom. And when that opens up, all those windows are different outputs of applications, but the upper left, just click on the upper left one. Click on share screen. I want you to click on the upper left one. That way we see your desktop.
Okay.
The upper left is your generally your primary viewing screen on your computer.
Mm-hmm. All it is a picture of me up there.
Yeah, just click on that. Click on the upper left one. I want you to click on the picture of you because that's actually what we want to see.
It's giving choices now. Choose virtual background. Stop video. Pin.
No, you clicked on the wrong button. Click on share screen, the one in the center and the bottom, the green share screen in the bottom.
Okay.
And then a window will open up with a bunch of little windows.
Yeah.
Click on the upper left one of those, the one that shows you the Zoom, where you see Zoom. Click on that and share that screen.
Where's Zoom?
On the upper left, there's a whole bunch of little windows. The upper left, the far upper left window is the one you want to click on.
Well, I have clicked on it now.
Now click share down at the bottom
All right.
where it says share.
Right here. No.
Did that do it?
I'm traveling in a circle.
No, I don't know what.
The aspect ratio is wrong. A height to width is wrong.
Yeah, somehow it's screwing up your output of your Mac.
I don't think we have the time to try to solve it, Joe. Are you able to proceed without screen sharing, or should we just save it for next time and we'll?
Well, I need a picture of something or proceed.
Now, why'd you do it next time?
Wait a minute, let's see.
All right, one more try and then we'll have to move on. You brought in the big help.
You got anything on the screen now?
No.
Okay. Well, I'll have to get more experience with this.
Okay, we'd love to have you on board next time. We'll spend a little more time making sure that you're properly briefed.
All right.
Thank you for your willingness to try. Next up, John Huckabee. Are you still with us, John?
Oh, yeah. If I hit my share screen, will the camera come up and show where I am?
Well, right now we're seeing you in front of a.
Okay.
Yeah. So is that what you'd like, or do you have?
Yeah, I need to show that diorama.
I think we can see it just where you are.
Okay. This is a small diorama called Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow. And it shows a gas station opening up, cars coming to visit. There's a little snack stand here. If you're going to ask about the railroad, it's across the street, double track main line, 2 passengers a day and 4 freight trains. And that's the way it is today. The owners coming out, greeting the cars like they did in the old days. We move along to today, and the station is sort of run down, well used. Freight trains are now only 2 a day, and passenger excursions are on the weekends. It's moving right along. Then we move in to tomorrow, and no freight, no passenger trains the gas station is being torn down, and here we have the original owner coming to check the progress of them tear it down. I think that's, I'm sorry I can't get it in focus any better.
That's cool.
Yeah, it, you know, and it's, I took the turntable out of the microwave so I could turn it. So that's what I have, gentlemen. Thank you.
Sounds like you're gonna have a cold lunch.
Yeah.
Very cool, John. Thanks.
That's cool. Yeah, and it's different and unusual. Thank you so much for sharing. Patiently standing by, Dave Grunman is our final presenter today. And he's only last because I just heard that he has some good stuff to share. So please, Dave, go right ahead.
Hey, you hear me now? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
What started this was because a lot of our layouts have a lot of switches. And when you have a lot of switches, you also have a lot of electronics. And along with the switches, you need to do uncouplers. And everybody knows the business about putting a little stick on there to uncouple cars. Well, a fellow in our Great Northern Railway Historical Society who runs a modeling page came up with a method for using permanent magnets to uncouple things. Now you can go and buy one of those permanent magnets that you put under your tracks, but every time the train goes through there, it uncouples everything. So he came up with a way of manually uncoupling or not uncoupling it. Now, I wrote to him and he gave me permission to share all of his techniques. So I'm going to show you a series of pictures. He did a board that I'll show you the first picture here. He had a spline that he set up, and he couldn't actually put one of those electromagnets under it, you know, electric kind, because they're too big and it would screw up the spline. So he came up with this little case that held the magnet. Now, when he puts the magnet in here, here's what it actually looks like. Now, don't worry about taking notes and things like this, because what I'm going to do is send this off to put it in our call board. And we have permission to do that. So this is what the electromagnet looks like, or the mechanical magnet looks like. And then when you activate it, it goes like so. You just slide it back and forth. And what they figured out was when you cut one of the permanent magnets in half and you slide it back and forth, that if it was pulled off to one side, it will not uncouple things. It just kind of moves the coupling hoses over a little bit. But if you push the magnet into the center, it uncouples them. And this is kind of like what Dave Crozier did with his switches. He used a double pole, double throw switch to not only activate the change in power for the switch, but also to actually move the switching points. So this kind of goes along with that idea. Now, to figure out where you put your magnet, someone who does maintenance on a railroad goes through occasionally and marks ties that need to be replaced. And as this gentleman came up with, you put a little yellow mark on the tie, and underneath that tie is that mechanical magnet. And it just happens to match up. Now, the technical stuff on doing that is quite involved. I have a drawing here, which I'll be sending that off for the call board publication also. And the advantage of all this is I hate rat nest wiring. And if anybody's looked under some of our layouts with all this wonderful signaling and this, that, and the other thing, try to find a wire. Now, I know you can do it by color coding, but you still have a rat's nest. I don't like that. So that's what I have. And I have permission from the Great Northern Historical Group to share this with everybody. No copyright or anything like that's going to be affected. So that's my my presentation.
Cool idea. And you'll send some details around.
Yes, I will. I'll
Lovely.
send them over to Scott to put it in the call board.
Fantastic. Good. That concludes our clinics and speeches and virtual tours today. What a great cast of characters we had. Thank you, everybody. The call, as we said at the outset, is recorded and archived. And we'll coordinate, send a link around because we'd love for you to not only view it again, but share it around. And we're also very pleased that Phil joined us from the Coast Division. I'm sure all of our speakers would be happy to be lent out to the Coast Division for similar events. And Phil and I have been talking about the fact that there's more and more we all can be doing together because we're all neighbors and it's all good stuff. Our next meet is February. Like everybody else, we're monitoring the world to see if we can do it in person or hybrid or not at all. We won't know until we get much closer. So in the meantime, be healthy, be safe. We're overjoyed that you joined us and more to come. Any closing comments or remarks, or should we just say goodbye for now?
A's, D's, and O's.
There you go. Goodbye for now. Thank you, everybody. Good to see you.
Thank you. Hey, thanks, everyone.